Hello, everyone. This is Max from Vermont, working for Green Mountain Self Advocates. Welcome to the webinar on plain language on this day of August 22nd, 2019. And before we get started, let's see if get my other presenters to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Zoe Gross. I'm the Director of Operations of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited there's interest and really excited to talk to you about plain language.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Topper. I'm a colleague of Max's. And both Max and I, and also Zoe, we are part of the Self-Advocacy Resource and Technical Assistance Center. And that's a national project that runs a clearinghouse, runs fellowships, provides lots of plain language information, toolkits, and policies information for the country around self-advocacy.
All right. So let's talk about what cognitively accessible means when we're talking about making our stuff that we offer cognitively accessible. First, when we say cognitively, that means it has to do with thinking and understanding. And then accessible means lots of people can use it, including disabled people. So a cognitively accessible toolkit is something, or any other kind of text resource, is something that most people can use and understand. And not just the people that things are normally geared to, but people who have difficulty with reading, people with intellectual developmental disabilities, people who speak another language as a first language, or there's lots of people who can really benefit from cognitively accessible formats. As we're going to learn later, in fact, most of us can.
So plain language is, we are getting at, plain language is about getting your message across. It's really about, if you've heard the term, nothing about us without us. I'll just kick things off by giving you an example of that. So for me personally, I love thunderstorms. And I happen to know quite a bit about, cloud formations and atmospheric instability. But if I want to have a real conversation with, with my family about my favorite topic, it would be best to use plain language. Or people, if I don't do that, people will just like fall asleep, and me, myself, and I will just start daydreaming. And if someone asks for plain language, it's like as an accommodation. Suggestion is do not judge. Assume that they are capable and of understanding what you have to say. You just need to say it in a different way. That's all.
All right, so today we're going to talk about two kinds of cognitively accessible formats. It says toolkit types, but you can actually use this for all kind of, any kind of resource. We're going to talk about plain language, and we're going to talk about Easyread. We'll get into a lot more nitty-gritty about both of these, but some things to keep in mind. With plain language, important details come first. You use active voice. Use the language that is as simple and familiar as possible. Spell out things like acronyms, and generally you explain new concepts as you introduce them. Easyread is a format that ASAN uses in a lot of our materials. It's originally from New Zealand. It is picture assisted, so there's a picture for every idea. You put fewer ideas on a page. There's a lot of white space. It's a large print format, and with every line it has a picture to illustrate the point of the line. This is especially useful with making really tricky abstract concepts concrete, and helping people sort of keep track of things as you move through a lot of tricky concepts. We have an Easyread toolkit on the federal budget process, which is written at a 4th grade reading level and is picture assisted. I invite everyone to take a look at that. We're really proud of it, and I geeked out about it for a long time. But now we're going to get into some more information on plain language.
I think this one's yours.
Oh gosh, this is still me. Yes. Sorry about that. All right. So for plain
It happened.
that's all good. For plain language, you want to use active voice. Active voice is when you say the person who is doing something is mentioned first, and then the thing they're doing. So I ate cake, not the cake was eaten. Here's a good test to see if something is an active voice or passive voice. Add the words by zombies to the end of your phrase or sentence. I ate cake by zombies. That doesn't make sense. That means it's an active voice. Adding the zombies doesn't work out. The cake was eaten by zombies. That does make sense. That means it's in passive voice. Or like the mistake was made by zombies, passive voice. I made the mistake by zombies. That doesn't make sense, active voice. Does that work for everyone?
It does.
All right, so that's a fun test. Something else that you need to make sure to do is you put the important details first. That's when you're presenting the information, you want to give an overview, and then you want to go into more detail about it. This is about like the order that you present information, but in a specific sentence, it can be helpful to put the most important thing last, because that's what people focus on. So to clarify that, like on a page, most important thing first, in a sentence, most important thing last. However, in both plain language and Easyread, you want fewer ideas per sentence. So ideally, every sentence is one idea, and then you don't need to order a bunch of ideas in the sentence because there's just one. You want to use simple and familiar language. So there's a couple ways to do this. One has to do with how short the words are. Shorter words are easier to read, and shorter sentences are easier to read. So if you're using a bunch of shorter words, your sentence is easy to read. Familiar language has to do with how common the words are. So I don't know if anyone has seen or heard of Upgoer 5, but this is a program that you can access on the internet, Google Upgoer 5. And when you do that, you can type in something and it will tell you which of the things you're saying are common words and which are uncommon words. That's a little bit extreme because that program only allows you to use the 1,000 most common words in the English language. And we can use words besides those. But it is helpful to use words that are common and that people already know. For reference, it's called Upgoer 5 because they use the 1,000 most common words in the English language to explain how rocket ships work, which is a really useful illustration of just how much you can explain using Easyread or plain language format. And then finally, you want to use accessible spacing. So 1.5 line spacing is good. Larger is always good too.
So I know there was a comment about just making sure we slow down, so we will do that. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. So I know this is a long, this is a long list, and I don't just want to put everyone to sleep like I said before. So you will find a link in the chat box to a checklist that includes all of these items. And when you go into the link, one side of the checklist you will see is a list of tips for rewriting information, and side 2 is a list of tips on how to format a document. And by formatting a document, I mean, changing how it looks on the page, and just there are tips on how to put paragraphs and pictures on the page. All right, so back to our plain language tips. The quickest way to make like something easier to understand is pretty much is using short sentences and make sure that you only talk about one idea in each sentence. I highly recommend to try to use 15 words or less in a sentence. There is a lot of information that we share, happens all the time, but to really get your point across, effectively, focus on what we need to know, and repeat the important words and phrases. We also recommend using words that are 3 syllables.
Max, you're on mute.
All right, hang on a minute. There was some technical difficulty.
You're good
All
now.
right, my bad. There was a little bit of a technical difficulty here when I was reading, so I'll just read this again. I apologize. So let's see. It was really just me ad-libbing, just notes I took. So, what I said was, I said that it's a long list, and I just, I don't want to put you guys to sleep. It's just, I don't like doing that to people. And you'll find a link in the chat box, as you can see. There's a checklist in it, and that includes all of the items that was just said. And on one side of the checklist, there's a lot of tips for rewriting information. And on side 2 of the is a list of on side 2, there's a list of tips on how to format a document. And when I say format a document, what I mean is, kind of really changing how it looks on the page. And there are tips on how to, put paragraphs and pictures on the page. So just wanted to point that out there to people. And so going back to the plain language, the fastest way, this is what I found, that the quickest way to make something easier to understand is just use short sentences. Using short sentences and making sure you only talk about one idea in each sentence. And try to use 15 words or less in a sentence. You don't want to overdo it with too many words. There's a lot of information that we share with each other, but to really get your point across effectively, focus on what we need to know and repeat the important words and phrases. We also recommend using words that are 3 syllables or less. So here is a list of what you can do when, like I said before, putting words and pictures on a page. Avoid using all capital letters. You want to make sure that you include a heading that lets, when I'm reading it, it helps because it lets me know what the paragraph is going to be about, and it helps find the information later. Also, another important tip I use all the time is to make sure that there is great contrast between the color of your text and the background. And so what I mean by that is just, as an example, look at the slide that you see in front of you on your computer screen or wherever you're projecting it from. See how the red box pops out and draws your attention, just immediately. That's what I mean when I say make sure that there's contrast between the color of your text and the background.
Hi, everybody. This is Topper. I wanted to get someone to help me out here. I can't really operate the PowerPoint and then also go to the chat box and put in the link.
I'll keep an eye on the chat box.
putting the link for getting these handouts, but it's pretty easy. If anybody's ever been to the SARTAC website, just Google and you put in selfadvocacyinfo.org. Anyways, when you go to that website, somebody could help me out. If you go
I got it, Topper.
You got the link, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. So now if anybody wants to download or to look at the PowerPoint, also we put a checklist in there that has all these different ideas on, so you can easily access that stuff because it's posted on the website.
And we've had people asking for the recording. Will that be available at this link too?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I'll put it up there. It probably will take me about an hour or so, but I'll definitely put it up there afterwards. So, alrighty. So I'm going to kind of finish up. So if you look at our checklist, eventually you'll see that the front side has like all the plain language tips, and then the back side has like what we call formatting tips. So that's like when you're putting all the paragraphs and the pictures and everything on a page, we have these tips that help you kind of know what's the best way to or what's a good way to kind of put the information on the page. I'm just going to mention a few more things. Here at GMS, at Green Mountain Self Advocates, we really find out that we have to remind people a whole lot to make sure that they use fonts like Arial or Verdana, and they're called, these fonts has a fancy term called sans serif. But anyways, they're just basically plain. The fonts are really fancy with a whole lot of curly cues on them. They're just the letters are kind of straight, so they're easier to read. And also we have to remind, especially when we go to to big meetings with the state or something like that, we really want people to use the size of the font needs to be at least 14. But we really also ask you to speak up when you go to a meeting, and if you need the information to be in a bigger print, you should tell people, because that's an accommodation and you have the right to ask for that. Another important point that I've found is to always use the words like do not or cannot or will not. Put both of those words out there when you're explaining something to someone. So you really want to not use things like, it's called a contraction, but please, avoid using things like don't or didn't or won't, because sometimes when you say that or you write it, people don't pick it up, and then they may not understand what it is you're talking about. Also, if you're trying to give people information, it's good to tell a story as an example, and do that rather than put some kind of graph or statistics in it. We also find that lists are really handy for sharing information. So here's a good example. If you're saying to people, okay, we're going to have lunch, and for lunch we're having pizza, and we're having salad, and we're having soup, and we're having ice cream. Sounds kind of good, huh? Well, rather than putting those all in one long sentence with a whole lot of commas, we would recommend that you just put them in a list, and it's easier for people to kind of get that information. And one thing that's my final point I want to make here is one thing that's kind of hard to remember is to try not to use italics or underline, and instead it's a lot easier for people if you just bold the letters that you want to emphasize.
All right, so we're going to talk about Easyread now. Like I said, Easyread is a picture-assisted format. It was designed to be accessible to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But Easyread materials are good for everyone, and everyone should use them. The point of Easyread is to be clear and easy to understand, and one way we achieve that is by having a picture to illustrate every idea. So, like in plain language, you want to avoid acronyms in Easyread. You generally want to spell things out. Sometimes you're going to have to make an exception. For example, if you're talking about home and community-based services, your sentences will be very, very long if you always say the phrase home and community-based services. And long sentences are not accessible. So you're going to have to choose between two ways of making things more accessible and see which one works better for you. In our case, when we were talking about home and community-based services, we do introduce the acronym and then we use it. But try to avoid acronyms as much as possible. And if you're going to use them or any unfamiliar term, make sure to define it. Something else with Easyread is that we have large space between lines. Most lines are one sentence, and not many ideas on a page. So a page is usually 3 or 4, maybe 5 sentences. I'm going to talk about the process of making icons for Easyread. One of the most important things about Easyread is that it helps people visualize like abstract ideas. So this is an icon for the phrase health coverage. We were thinking about what to do here, and we thought coverage, it's like having an umbrella over you. So we did a first aid kit attached to an umbrella. That is the concept of health coverage. And then when this shows up again, people understand that we're talking about coverage. Coverage is a kind of abstract idea that makes it more concrete. Next one, run for office. It's a picture of someone running, in this case holding a briefcase, towards the Capitol building where elected officials work. It's a metaphor, and often metaphors can be difficult for some of us who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, especially autistic people. So it helps us keep track of the fact that we're using the word run, but it has to do with you want to end up in that Capitol building making laws. And then here's another one that I really enjoyed. We're talking about a program called Money Follows the Person. The point of this program is that you should be able to receive services even if you move. So the money that funds your services from benefits travels with you if you move states instead of having to set it up all over again. Or if you move out of an institution. That's something that Money Follows the Person is very important for. And again, we wanted to illustrate the phrase and sort of show what it means. So it's a person with a disability and they have a dollar bill following them around. And then when Money Follows the Person shows up again, we see this throughout the toolkit. It helps people keep track of the concept. And remember, it's an acronym. You can hear these common terms a lot and they can start to use meaning. So this helps remind about what the central idea is, which is that you can take your benefits with you when you go different places.
So, thank you for that. And those graphics I like a lot. The lower the better reading level when it comes to it. So plain language equals 5th to 8th grade reading level, depending on who you ask, but it usually does. And Easyread equals 3rd and 4th grade reading level. So, we talk about reading level using grades, but we say something is at, the 3rd grade level, like when we say that, like a 3rd grade level. But we do that because it's an easy way to measure readability, but it can give people the wrong idea. And so I really wish that, they would not use grade level when rating information. We already have an issue with people thinking that we are not smart and we are like children. And this way of rating contributes to that mindset. So lower reading levels are better for everyone, not just kids. And we can write about complicated topics at low reading levels, and we should. To be honest, a person who can take complicated information and contribute it in a straightforward way, to me, that person is, clever and talented. So that's what I found going about this. I wonder if, Topper, if you have anything to add to that.
I do. In fact, I have a quiz for everybody. So I guess maybe I can let you cheat a little bit. I'll show you some of the answers. So this is a chart, which we just said it's not good to show charts, but we wanted to share this information about it's about the reading level of a lot of best-selling authors' books. So my quiz to you is, and you don't need to memorize or look at all this information. I just have 3 questions. One is, there's a famous author, and his name was Ernest Hemingway, and he wrote Old Man and His Sea. He wrote When the Bell Tolls. He wrote a lot of famous books. And in the chat box, can somebody write for me a guess as to what reading level the books were for Ernest Hemingway?
I see 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade.
All right.
8th, 5th, 3rd, 2nd, 4th.
Well, the people that said 4th grade guessed right. What about Jane Austen? She's another famous writer. She wrote the book Pride and Prejudice. A lot of people may have read that in school. Anybody have a guess as to what reading level she wrote on? You can use the chat again if you like.
I see a lot of 7th. 7, 7, 7, 7, 9, 6, 3rd.
She actually wrote at a 5th grade level. And the last one, a more modern author, is Stephen King. He wrote a lot of horror books and were turned into movies. Does anybody have any guess at what reading level Stephen King wrote at or writes at?
I see 4, 6, 4, 8, 10, 8, 9, 3.
All right.
That's
So
4, 4.
the answer is 6 for Stephen King. And for the first Harry Potter book was written at a 6th grade level. So the point here is just that, a lot of very famous authors that write about really complicated concepts were able to get their message across by writing on a reading level that's more accessible to the general public. And so if someone ever asks you the question, geez, why are you using plain language? I would suggest that, or I think we all would suggest that you point out that it makes it better for everyone. And when everyone can use the information, we have a richer experience. And if you're someone that works for a university or works for an organization or the state, if your goal is to build stronger partnerships with organizations or with people with disabilities, oh, I am really sorry about that. That's pretty embarrassing. We unplugged our phone to make sure that wouldn't happen. And so much for remote phones. So excuse me, I'm coming right back here. So let me get back to where I was. If your goal is to build strong partnerships with people with disabilities, plain language really is a way for you to be able to get meaningful input and ideas for people with disabilities. So that's why we think it's really important for your organization to have a plain language policy, and it really helps you to keep access and inclusion at the top of your priorities. For this slide, I just want to point out that the national people that do assessments around adult literacy, they've found that actually only 12% of the people in the United States have their knowledge of their ability to read and understand information about health is really 9 out of 10 people in the United States really have difficulty understanding information they need to know about being healthy. So it just shows you that we're not just talking about people with, we're not just talking about self-advocates and people with intellectual disabilities. We're talking about really the vast majority of people in the United States really prefer to have, if they're really going to get information and understand it, they need to have it presented at a reading level that's more accessible. I'm going to wrap up here by saying that the things that affect a reading level are how many long sentences there are, how many syllables there are in a sentence, and how many words you have in a sentence. Like Max before was talking about how it's really good to kind of, shoot for having or aim for having like 15 or less words in your sentence. Also, how long your words are. You want to look for words that have 3 syllables or less. And at Green Mountain Self-Advocates, we talk about having living room language. So we're looking for as Zoe already has pointed out, we're looking to use kind of common and familiar words, and to kind of, as Max was pointing out, even though it's a complicated topic, you want to be able to share that information in words that people are familiar with. Zoe, back to you.
All right. So I just saw a question in the chat. First of all, I do want to say to people, we will have a section at the end where you can ask questions and we will answer them. We're probably not going to stop and answer questions throughout the whole thing, but I happened to see one just now that is what I'm about to talk about, which is where can you go and get your writing checked to find out what reading level it is. Mm-hmm. There are several places. There is a website, readable.io. You can use that. There's a free version and a premium one you have to pay for, but both will give you information. There's also a free website, Automatic Readability Checker. If you Google Automatic Readability Checker, you will find it. There are a lot of different tests to find out what reading level something is. And they all use a lot of math. They use slightly different formulas. And some of them weight things more heavily than others, so it's good to see different ones. The good thing about these websites is both of them use a lot of different tests, and they show you all of the results, so you can get a good kind of aggregate idea of combining all of them to see how accessible is the writing overall. I'm just going to show you quickly what it looks like when you use Readable. A good thing about Readable is that they will give you a grade level, and then they'll highlight where is the problem. So here I put in some writing. It was not super accessible. It's averaging around a 9th grade reading level according to their different tests. But if I go to this tab where it's highlighting the issues with the long words and sentences, it will go back to the text and show me which sentences and words were too long. Or other issues like, where did I use passive voice? Or is there grammar that's confusing? Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt. Readable really hates adverbs. So adverbs are words like sadly or very, there's some time-related words it doesn't like as well. So you can just ignore the feedback about adverbs. Sometimes it doesn't want you to say things like, I do this while you do that, because it thinks the word that is an adverb, or the word while or something. Something that we sometimes do if we have to use a very long word is, first of all, like I said, we make sure to define it. Like, say we're writing about home and community-based services. We need to use the term home and community-based services. Otherwise, people won't understand how what we're saying applies to what they're hearing out in the world about home and community-based services. But we need Readable to show us, even though we have to use those words, where else in the document are we using words that aren't necessary that are too long, or sentences that aren't necessary that are too long? So what we might do is, when we've defined a term and it's long and we have to use it, we go through the text, we make a copy, we replace that word with the word apple, or boat or something else. And then we send it through again. And then it'll show us, of the things that we're able to change, which are the problems.
Okay, we are going to very quickly, Max and I are going to kind of show you an example. Here, Green Mountain Self-Advocates, we're from up in Vermont. For the last 4 years, we've been spending a lot of time with doctors and nurses and other people that work for the health department to work with them to make the information that they give out to, you know, be written in plain language. So I'm not going to go, we're not going to read word for word for all this information, but they gave us this information that they give out to patients that have what is called conjunctivitis. And if anybody has ever heard of conjunctivitis, it really is pink eye. So when the doctor's office gives out this slip of paper that explains what conjunctivitis is, it kind of goes on and on about this is an inflammation or swelling of the conjunctiva, often called pink eye, and conjunctivitis is a common eye disease. It may affect one or both eyes. Some forms of conjunctivitis are highly contagious. Anyways, this kind of goes on and on and on. I am going to, this is written on an 8th grade level. This is the same information written on a 5th grade level. Go for it, Max. Just read maybe the first half of it.
Okay. Pink eye. You have an eye infection called pink eye. To make it go away, you need to get eye drops from the drugstore. Squeeze eye drops into your effective eye 3 times per day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and use the drops until they are gone.
And here is the same information written on a 2nd grade level. And you can see here that we put in a little chart that says use 3 drops a day. We put like a little checklist, morning, noon, and night. And we ended it by saying use the drops until they are gone. Pink eye is really easy to give to another person's. Wash your hands a lot. So
all right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so that's just an example of how you can take something that information people really need to know. And when you download this PowerPoint, you can see how we were able to take that paragraph and turn it in and rewrite it on 2 different ways. Thank you, Zoe.
Okay, so we're going to do what Topper just showed us right now, all of us as a group, to try and see how it's done in real time. Let's take this sentence, which is written in a very inaccessible way, and rewrite it in plain language. The sentence is, information concerning long-term care issues for seniors and people with disabilities has been made available on a new website developed by the County Department of Community and Senior Services. Now, remembering the tips we gave about plain language, using short words, using short sentences, keep trying to keep few ideas in a sentence, ideally 1 idea in a sentence, not using passive voice, those kinds of things. Do people have ideas about how we can start to break this up to make it more plain language? I have someone saying, seniors and people with disabilities can get more info about long-term care supports and services at the website, and then they say what it is. That is a great first step. It says who it's for and where they can get it. It's not in this weird backwards way that the sentence is. Yeah, that's much better already. So that's in the chat. Nicole says information on long-term care issues for seniors and people with disabilities is on a new website. The name of the website is the County Department of Community and Senior Services. Paulette says there's a new website. It will have help for long-term care for seniors and all people. I'm seeing some great stuff here. I really like that people are thinking about what information to prioritize and breaking this up into multiple sentences. Kara says, the County Department of Community Services and Services has a new website. This website talks about how people with disabilities and seniors can get the care they need for their entire lives. Kara, I really like that you explained what long-term care is here, and that was explained in a very accessible way. All of these, I think, are good ideas. Is this helpful to people? Does anyone need more insight into like the process that we're all going through, or what makes Leslie and Nicole and Paulette and Kara's ideas easier to understand than what's on the screen? I see. Thank you. This is great. You're welcome. I'm so glad it's helping. I just thought that would be a good exercise to go through. So something we're going to try now is let's try thinking about Easyread. Taking text that's written, that's ready to be formatted in Easyread, like this text here, and then assigning pictures to it is tricky for a lot of people, especially when we're talking about abstract ideas that we need to show with pictures. So there's 2 steps to this process. The first one is you look at a line. A line is like the unit of information that gets illustrated with one picture, usually one sentence. You look at a line and you say, what is the most important idea in this line? That's the idea you want to illustrate. You get together with some people and you think of what kind of picture could show that idea the best. And then out of all of the options, you pick the best picture you've all thought of. So let's start with this first bullet point. Medicaid is a kind of health insurance. What do people think is the most important idea in that line? I'm seeing health insurance. B. Simpson says insurance. If available, use a sample Medicaid card. I like that because it's something people would already have. But so let's just check what concept would that be illustrating. If we use the Medicaid card, I think it would illustrate Medicaid. And that would be a great way to illustrate Medicaid, although it is state specific. We've had some suggestions that health insurance is the primary idea in this line, the most important idea. That makes sense to me. Let's talk about how we would illustrate the concept of health insurance. This can be hard to figure out, so let's talk it out. We're talking about insurance. Insurance is something that it helps make sure that you'll be healthy later. People pay insurance and then the insurance company helps them pay for the health care. So help paying for your health care might be a good idea to try and illustrate. Like you did before, umbrella and hospital building. That's interesting. So that was coverage, and coverage is very similar to insurance. A lot of people recognize their insurance card. I've got government building giving cash to doctor. That's really interesting. That might be a good way to illustrate the third line here, which has to do with government pay. For health insurance, I've got hospital, money in a hospital. There's some icons also that we use to illustrate help that are like hands reaching out to other hands. So it could be like a hand offering money to show they're helping pay for something next to something indicating health, like a hospital, a doctor, or like a heart sign with a little plus in it. I've got some suggestions: Medicaid card, scissors cutting a bill to show that you pay less. These are all really good, interesting ideas. I'm seeing a couple questions on chat about, do we need to illustrate all of these lines given that the concepts in them are similar? So we do. And it's okay that we're talking about similar concepts. It can be challenging when you have 2 similar concepts next to each other to figure out what, like, is there a different central idea to illustrate? Are we going to try and illustrate the central idea with different pictures? We try to keep the same picture per idea. So if health insurance comes up later, we would use the same health insurance illustration, but not to put the same icon like next to each other twice. So if the central idea of this first line is health insurance, we would try to pick a different central idea for the second line. Let's repeat this process. Having health insurance means you don't pay the full cost of your health care. What would be a good central idea to illustrate there? You don't pay the full cost. Says Kara. That makes a lot of sense. And we've had some people talking about ways to illustrate that. A bill that's cut in half, I think someone mentioned earlier, that would be a good way of showing you don't have to pay the full cost. A hand helping with money could be another way. What's another way can people think of to show that? We could also show someone paying, like a hand paying and cross it out, or like you don't pay. Money crossed out with a hospital building proposed here. So those are all some good ideas. And then finally, if you have Medicaid, the government helps pay for your health care. We have an icon called Government Pays that we use a lot, which is a government building and then a hand holding money. That's something we could use here. If it was specifically referring to healthcare, it could be, I said piggy bank, then coins into a hand. That's an interesting idea. Is that for health insurance or for government paying? Yeah, to illustrate paying, that does make sense. So I think that we've done some really good work here thinking of ways to illustrate concepts. This can be really tricky. Usually the way we do it is in a process just like this. We get a bunch of people together and we say, hey, I'm having trouble showing this concept or that concept. How should we show it? Something that's really cool about Easyread is that it's almost its own language. So you can start sort of conjugating or combining the Easyread images in a way that's interesting. We have a sign that means don't know. It's like a person's head, and then you have a thought bubble and a question mark. It means that person doesn't know something. But then if we're talking about like people not knowing about a specific thing, like we'll say the government doesn't know what people with disabilities want or something like that, then we would show the don't know sign, but in the thinking box with the question mark is like a disability icon. If we're saying someone doesn't know how to make a sandwich, it's the don't know sign, the person, the thought bubble, the question mark, and then a sandwich. So you can start to sort of combine things to show new ideas. Does that make sense?
It does.
Awesome. I'm seeing some questions about where do you get Easyread images. Yeah, it is often nice if they're formatted in a similar way. We use vector graphics packages, which our graphic designer buys and we reimburse. But sometimes you can use basic clip art packages that come with like Word or PowerPoint or other software. Kara mentioned symbol sticks. Those are also good simple illustrations. I think Envato and Vecteezy are two of the places that we buy vector graphics from. And then Narissa has mentioned the Noun Project. Yeah, they have some icons as well. So here are some resources. You can download the PowerPoint on the SARTAC website, and you can use links to all of these. Now we're going to move on, I think, to questions.
So does anyone have any questions about what we've presented to you? I know there was some in the chat box, but...
Yeah. So Lee in the chat has linked where you can download the PowerPoint again. Thank you, Lee. Jay Clark says, I have a question. What is the elevator speech about plain language? You have suggestions. I just like using reading levels as a description. Max Topper, do you want to take this or shall I?
Go for it.
So when I'm explaining plain language to people quickly, I say, you can get people the most information by speaking plainly. When you start to write in plain language, you'll see that you have to go and look up more facts and put them in, because you didn't realize this, but when you were writing at a high reading level, you were leaving stuff out. Writing in plain language demonstrates better mastery of the concept that you're talking about, and it means that the most people possible can understand you. And when people are making products that are aimed at the general public, resources that people can use to help them with things, their goal should be to make sure the most people possible can understand them. And you don't need to leave out information to put something in plain language. If anything, you need more information. And you don't have to use only simple ideas. You can talk about really complicated things like the federal budget process or Medicaid in plain language. You just have to do it differently. And when you're done explaining something in plain language, the people you are writing for will understand it better, and you will also understand it better. Does that help?
That's great. That was a great response.
Lots of questions here from Morgan. I see, what is a good source material to use or practice Easyread or plain language? Rewriting papers or news articles, or using a concept that an Easyread guide exists for and comparing them after. I really like that idea. I hadn't thought of it. But yeah, absolutely. Something you could do is you say, I know there's an Easyread guide to Medicaid, so I'm going to try and write a summary about Medicaid in Easyread, and then if I get stuck on something, I can see how they did it. Rewriting newsletters or newspapers or news articles, that can be really helpful. If you write stuff for a living, you can also just take, or for school or anything, you can take something you wrote earlier and see, can I get this to a 5th grade reading level? Can I get it to a 3rd grade reading level? If I had to illustrate it with pictures, what kind of pictures would I use? It is good to practice as much as possible. And then if you are able, show what you practiced with to people and get feedback. So show it to people who work on this stuff a lot, people who make plain language materials, and show it to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to really user test it to see if it's working. Something that we've done informally before and are about to start doing formally, and I'm really excited about, is testing our Easyread toolkits before we release them by focus grouping them with a lot of self-advocates. And we're doing that for the first time next week. I'm really thrilled, so hopefully we'll have information on how to do that later on. Here's some more questions from Lee. Can you repeat the trick for figuring out active versus passive statements? Okay, this is really fun. So, if you have a sentence and you don't know if it's an active voice or passive voice, you say at the end, "by zombies." If the sentence makes sense when you add "by zombies," it is in passive voice. And that means you need to change it to make it active voice so that you can have all the information possible in the sentence. So something that I'm just going to use an example. When people make mistakes, they sometimes say mistakes were made to avoid saying who made the mistakes because it was them, and they don't want to say that. So add "by zombies." Mistakes were made by zombies. Yes, that makes sense. You can think about the zombies making mistakes. The sentence flows. That is in passive voice. It's leaving information out, and that's the gap for the zombies to go into. How would you say it differently? You would say, "I made mistakes." If I said, "I made mistakes by zombies," that does not make sense. The zombies don't belong there, and that shows that it's active voice, and it keeps out the zombies, and that's what you should be doing. And then also here, I saw the icon earlier. Oh, thank you. Someone said that's the first time I understood active and passive voice. I'm so glad that helped. I saw the icon earlier in your presentation for physical disability. What icon do you use for intellectual disability? Is it correct to assume the wheelchair is inclusive for all disability? Master Topper, do you want to talk about what GMSA does here?
I think sometimes we use pictures of people who may have a more, it may be obvious that they have Down syndrome. Sometimes we may have a picture of someone and they might be thinking about something. And again, it might be a picture of somebody that looks that their appearance looks as if they're someone with an intellectual disability. And sometimes we may just have if we're using a graphic, we'll use a brain. Or at the very beginning, I could give everybody a headache if I go way far back, but in the very beginning of this PowerPoint, we did have a slide that showed 2 different brains of communication and what we use for plain language, and looked at how information was kind of confused and then information that was kind of flowing. But we can also, if you the email, you can send an email to at the SARTAC website, or also send one to info@gmsavt.org, and we'd be glad to share with you some graphics that we use. Did you have other ideas, Zoe?
I think you hit on the ones that I know about. We also use a picture of a brain inside someone's head to illustrate intellectual disability. And for the question, is it correct to assume the wheelchair is inclusive for all disability? If we need to have like a shorthand for disability as a whole, we do sometimes just use the wheelchair icon, and people do understand that. There are other access icons, like there's one that has a whole range of images to show different disabilities, like something to show like a brain, and the wheelchair icon, and like a hearing aid, and other things. But if you need to combine that with other things, that can be hard to use. So if we need to use disability as only one component in an Easyread icon, we will use the wheelchair. James asks, Topper, can you give us that site for icons again?
Oh, okay. And also, if you download the PowerPoint, all of these links are on there. It's just about 4 minutes before. So Zoe, I'm at a loss here. Thank you for going through the questions, because I can't see them.
No worries. There's just a few more, and then if you can go back to the slide that has our email addresses, we do have that way for people to follow up.
That's true. Thank you.
Something I see here, is there any way to use Easyread for people with vision disabilities? Yes, there is. What you can make sure to do is you have image descriptions written for your Easyread icon. And then when you format your Easyread resource, you have to make sure it is screen reader accessible. So we have a graphic designer who works for us who knows how to do that. And they go through, and when we make an Easyread resource, they write descriptions for all the icons. And then they test it after it's formatted to make sure that a screen reader is picking up the descriptions and reads everything in the right order.
And just to add to that, when the way Zoe's talking is that if we, I don't know if it'll happen if I click on this. It doesn't seem to be happening. So, but if you click on an image, usually a little box comes up that'll say the words ALT text. And if you click on that, then you can write in the words you use to describe that particular image that you're using. Is there one last question, Zoe?
Oh yeah, here's one we didn't get to yet. Are certain images or icons considered offensive by people with disabilities in the Easyread context? That's a really good question. Max Topper, do you have anything on that?
I mean, for us, it's interesting. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry, Max. Were you going to say something?
I think I think it depends on how somebody looks at it, but from their perspective.
We avoid, like, if you're trying to talk about recreational activities, we actually just dealt with this week in our office, and you're getting pictures of people playing, well, it's Vermont, so playing hockey or going snowboarding or going snowshoeing. We wouldn't put pictures of children doing those activities. We would put pictures of adults. And so that's one thing I can think of. What else can you think of, Zoe?
I think there are ways that things could be offensive. Someone just mentioned the puzzle pieces for autism. And yeah, that is something research has found that it's stigmatizing to use. I would just say something that could be a problem is, like, if whenever you're showing disabled people, they're like sad or helpless. You want to make sure that people look empowered. And also something to keep an eye on is making sure that there's racial and gender diversity in your portrayals of people in your icons. And there should be good places to get that. Some good tips here. Also, Nicole says, make sure it isn't too kiddish to avoid paternalism. So yeah, like what Topper said about when you're talking about adults, portray adults. That's a very good tip as well. I'm so glad that you love it. Sorry, go ahead.
With so many cell phones available these days, I mean, we just really are encouraging people to take pictures. If you're talking about employment, ask people if they're willing to take a picture of themselves at work, and using real pictures just seems to even get the message across clearer. So.
All right.
All right.
We're going to have to wrap up. We're at time. Thank you all so much. This was really fun to do, and I'm so glad everyone enjoyed stuff. You can follow up at these email addresses if you have questions. We might not be able to like consult on things. We're all pretty busy, but we will try and help and point to resources. And then this recording and all of the things that were used in the presentation will be on the SARTAC website.
Right. And we just encourage everybody to just give it a try. It's not like Max and Zoe and I have some sort of degree in plain language. We just are so committed, you know, I mean, all of us, just part of a movement to involve as many people as possible. So we just have kind of fallen into all of this over the years. So anyways, good luck and be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.